The call came at 4:47 in the morning. Not the kind of call you answer half asleep and forget by breakfast. The kind that sits you straight up in bed with your heart already somewhere ahead of your brain, running. Sir Edmund Foley, head of Royal Household Security, had been in this job 19 years. He'd stood outside hospital rooms. He'd escorted coffins. He'd held secrets that would have set Fleet Street on fire for a decade. He did not rattle easily. He rattled now. He was dressed and in his car before the call even ended. The private terminal at Heathrow's North Perimeter doesn't appear on tourist maps. It sits behind a gray access road that looks like it leads to a maintenance depot and then simply doesn't. The kind of place designed to be forgotten. Chartered jets moved through it like whispers. Quietly. Without record. That was the point. Foley arrived to find 3 vehicles already idling on the tarmac, headlights cutting the November dark. The fog was doing that London thing where it doesn't quite rain but makes everything damp anyway, the kind of morning that soaks into your collar before you've realized it's happening. A Gulfstream G550 sat at the far end of the apron. Cream-colored. No visible tail registration from this angle. Ground crew frozen at a careful distance. The way workers freeze when they understand something important is happening, and their instinct for self-preservation has kicked in. Detective Superintendent Claire Howell was already there, standing apart from her team, coffee in hand, watching Foley cross the tarmac like she'd been waiting for him specifically. She probably had. They found it during the pre-departure sweep, she said. No greeting. No preamble. Claire Howell had been doing pre-dawn crises long enough to have lost interest in social niceties somewhere around 2019. Maintenance flagged an anomaly in the cargo hold. Unmanifested baggage. Foley looked at the plane. How many aboard? 3 crew. 2 passengers. He already knew one of the passengers. That was why he was here instead of sending someone junior. That was why nobody had used names on the phone call. And the other passenger? Howell turned her coffee cup slowly in both hands. Attell. She was deciding how to phrase something. In his experience, when Claire Howell paused to phrase something, it was because the direct version of it would sound like fiction. We're still working on that, she said. Tom Parker had been Camilla's eldest son in the way that certain titles sit on people. Technically accurate, publicly understood, privately complicated. He was 45 now, sandy-haired in a manner that photographed silver. The kind of jaw that tabloids described as patrician and his ex-wife had described as stubborn. He ran a consultancy that advised emerging markets on something to do with agricultural investment, which was the kind of job description that explained nothing and required no further explanation. He was seated in the forward cabin when Foley boarded, jacket still on, posture composed in the particular way of someone who has decided that composure is the only card left in the deck. Tom Parker looked up. He did not look surprised. That was the first thing Foley registered, and it settled into his chest like cold water. Edmund, Tom said. First name. They'd known each other long enough for that. Charity functions. A skiing trip in Closters, years ago, when the family arrangements had still been different. When everything had still been different. Tom. Foley sat across from him. Didn't open his notebook. Didn't signal to anyone behind him. Just sat. Tell me what's in the hold. Tom Parker looked out the window at the tarmac. At the fog. At nothing in particular. It's not what it looks like, he said. Foley waited. The sentence hung there between them in the recycled cabin air. In my experience, Foley said finally, that's what people say when it's exactly what it looks like. Tom closed his eyes for 3 full seconds. When he opened them, something had shifted in his face. Not collapse, not quite. The surrender of a man who has rehearsed a story for a long time and has just decided the performance isn't worth the energy anymore. It's documents, he said. Private correspondence. Between my mother and someone she trusted. Someone who is no longer alive and cannot speak for himself. He paused. And someone who is very much alive and would prefer that no one speak for him either. Foley felt the temperature in the cabin drop approximately 4 degrees. It didn't. That was his nervous system doing that thing it did when the shape of something enormous became visible before you could see the details. How long have you had them? He asked. Tom Parker looked at him with an expression that was either exhaustion or grief. Since the funeral, he said. Outside, the fog pressed against the porthole windows like it was listening. They brought the case up from the hold at 6:14 a.m. It was not glamorous. Nothing about it suggested significance. A black document case, the kind you buy at a luggage shop in any mid-range hotel district. Samsonite, combination lock, scuffed at both corners like it had been moved and moved and moved again. Not hidden, exactly. Nestled between 2 pieces of Tom's registered luggage, close enough to look intentional. close enough that it would have passed a casual inspection. It had not passed. Howell set it on the table in the forward cabin without ceremony. 3 people in the room now. Folly, Howell, Tom Parker, who had said nothing for 18 minutes and showed no signs of starting. The lock, Howell said. Tom reached into his jacket pocket, produced a small piece of card. For digits written in pencil, someone else's handwriting, Folly registered, looping, and slightly leftward. He read the numbers out without looking at them, like he'd had them memorized for a long time. Howell keyed the combination. The latches released with 2 clean clicks. Inside, letters. Actual paper letters, the kind nobody writes anymore, because nobody trusts paper anymore, which is precisely why someone had written these on paper. 40 or 50 of them, bundled in pale blue ribbon. Beneath those, a leather-bound journal, initials embossed on the cover, partially worn away by time and handling. And, beneath that, a single photograph, face down. Folly reached for the photograph first. Tom's hand came down on his wrist. Not hard, not aggressive. The way you grab someone's arm when they're about to step off a curb into traffic. Don't, Tom said quietly. Not until you've read the first letter. Context matters here. Context matters enormously. Folly looked at him. Tom let go. The first letter was dated 14 years ago. He read it standing up, one hand braced against the cabin wall, the world outside the window going from black to gray as Heathrow began its ordinary morning. Planes taxiing. Ground crews appearing like figures from a fog machine. London waking up in that relentless, indifferent way it always did regardless of what was happening inside private terminals to people with complicated last names. He read it twice. Then, he put it down very carefully on the table, the way you put down something fragile, even though it was just paper. Who else knows? He asked. 3 people, Tom said. The person who wrote that letter. The person it was written to. And, now my mother. He looked at the case. And now you. The person it was written to died, Tom said. 8 months ago. Not publicly. Not in any way that connected to any of this. He rubbed his thumb along his jawline, a gesture that looked habitual, reflexive. He'd been ill for 3 years. He held on to these. He could have destroyed them. He didn't. Why not? Tom Parker's eyes were very steady when they met Folly's. The kind of steady that comes not from calm but from having lived with a thing so long it stops being frightening and starts being simply the shape of your life. Because he believed it mattered, Tom said. What happened? What was asked? What was agreed to? He believed someone should know. A breath. He left them to me in his will. Not in writing, nothing that explicit. But in a package. No note. Just this case. And a phone call from his solicitor telling me it existed. Folly looked at Howell. Howell looked at the letters. And the photograph, Folly said. Silence. The photograph, Tom said, is why I was leaving the country. They were an hour into it when the second passenger made herself known. She'd been in the rear cabin the entire time. Folly had assumed. He wasn't sure what he'd assumed. A colleague. A travel companion. Someone incidental. She walked forward in a gray cashmere sweater and the expression of a woman who has decided to stop waiting for permission. Late 60s. White hair, cut short, and precise. Eyes that were doing that thing where they assessed a room faster than the room assessed them. Folly recognized her. Most people in his position would have. She had spent 31 years in royal service in a role that had no official title and appeared on no organizational chart. She was the kind of person described, in the careful language of people who understood the institution, as essential. She had stepped back quietly 4 years ago, and everyone had understood that step back was doing heavy lifting. Mrs. Alderton, Folly said. Edmund. She sat down, folded her hands. I imagine you have questions. I have one, he said. Were you present when these were written? She looked at the case. Something moved through her face. Not guilt, not regret. Older than both. Some of them, she said. I was present for the situation that made them necessary. She paused. I was the one who told him he needed to write things down. That someday, the people who came after would need to understand what was asked of him. What he gave up. And why. Her voice didn't waver. He was an honorable man in an arrangement that didn't always allow for honor. He deserved to have that known. The fog outside had started to lift. Or maybe Heathrow had just gotten brighter as the morning committed to itself. Folly sat back down, looked at the letters, looked at the journal, looked at the photograph still lying face down on the table. He was going to have to make a phone call. Not to the palace switchboard. Not to any of the numbers that appeared in his official contacts. To the one number written in his own handwriting on a card he kept in his breast pocket and had hoped, genuinely and sincerely hoped, to never need. Give me the room, he said. Tom, and Mrs. Alderton stood without argument. Folly turned the photograph over. He looked at it for a long time. His hand, when he reached for his phone, was completely steady. He'd made peace with being the kind of man who could hold things like this and not break. He wasn't sure, looking at the photograph, if that was something to be proud of. By 9 o'clock, 3 more cars had arrived. Not police. Not press. The other kind. The ones in dark saloons with no plates you'd recognize, driven by people whose job descriptions had never been written down anywhere. Tom watched them from the terminal window with the expression of a man watching whether he'd forecast, and still isn't glad to be right about. Mrs. Alderton had been given tea. Real tea, not the airport kind. Someone had organized this. Someone always organized the small dignities when larger ones were no longer available. They'll take them, Tom said. Not a question. Yes, Folly said. And no one will know. Folly didn't answer that, which was, of course, its own kind of answer. What happened next took 40 minutes and involved no raised voices, which was how you knew it was serious. Serious things in this world moved quietly. They moved in small rooms with closed doors and careful language and the perpetual British institutional hum of things being managed rather than felt. The document case was logged, photographed, transferred to a gray archive box of the kind used by solicitors and government departments and people who understood that bureaucracy was the most effective form of erasure ever devised. The letters went into the box. The journal, the pale blue ribbon, even that, because details matter, and details that are left out of boxes have a habit of surfacing. Folly held the photograph for a moment before it went in. He thought about the man in it. Not the famous face. The other one, standing slightly to the left, slightly too close, with the expression of someone who has just said something true in a setting where truth was the most dangerous thing in the room. The man on the left had been 26 years old when that photograph was taken. He'd given something up the following year. Not loudly. The narrative had been about duty and service and the family's needs, the standard vocabulary deployed when the institution needs a human being to become something more useful than a person. He'd done it. He'd written letters about it afterward, to the one person who knew what he'd actually lost. He'd kept writing them for 11 years. And that person had kept them, hidden in a property in Wiltshire that had passed through 3 legal arrangements specifically designed to keep it unattributable. An honorable man in an arrangement that didn't always allow for honor. The photograph went into the box. Tom was allowed to leave at 10:20. Not leave. There would be meetings, protocols, the careful machinery of containment doing what it was built to do. But the terminal, the tarmac, the gray November morning, those he was allowed to leave. Folly walked him out. They stood for a moment on the apron. The fog had gone. The sky was doing that washed-out English blue that never commits to being beautiful, but manages it anyway. She knows, Tom said. My mother. She's known for 8 months. Since the solicitor called me. I know, Folly said. She didn't destroy them. She could have told me to. She didn't. The planes moved on the distant runways. The ordinary business of the world, indifferent and ceaseless. Why did you take them? Folly asked. Why move them at all, after all this time? Tom looked at the sky. Because someone was asking questions, he said. A journalist. Not Fleet Street, someone methodical. Someone who'd been building a file for 2 years without knowing quite what they were building toward. I heard about it through someone who owed me a favor. He paused. I panicked, I suppose. I thought if I moved the documents out of the country to a property abroad where no one would look. He stopped. Exhaled. Brilliant plan. Not your finest hour. No. Something that was almost a smile. Almost. My mother will be. I'll speak to her. Tom looked at him. A long look, the kind that is really a question. She already knows this day was coming. Folly said. People like her always know. They just choose, for as long as they can manage, not to know it yet. Tom nodded. Once. Slowly. He got into the car. It pulled away across the tarmac without drama, the way all the important departures in this world seemed to happen. Quietly. Like they were trying not to be noticed even by themselves. Folly stood there for a moment after the car had gone. He thought about the man in the photograph. He thought about the 11 years of letters. He thought about what it cost a person to give up something real for an institution, and to do it so completely, and so quietly, that the institution never even had to acknowledge the debt. He thought about the word duty, and all the things it had been used to cover. Then, he went back inside, because there was work to do, and he was the kind of man who did it. And because the gray archive box was waiting, and because the things inside it were going now to a place designed specifically for inconvenient truths. A place with temperature control, and acid-free tissue, and perfect, impeccable dark, where they would be preserved. Forever. Unseen. Outside, Heathrow made its enormous, ordinary noise. Engines. Tannoys. 100,000 people going somewhere, carrying things they couldn't declare, holding secrets that would never fill a gray archive box because they weren't important enough, or dangerous enough, or true enough. The case was closed. The story wasn't. It never is, with things like this. It just goes quiet. And you learn to hear the difference.